Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I've had this channel for 3 years and I am now, only just now, finally filming this video, but I am so excited to do it. I've talked about this so many times on my channel, and I think it is finally time to do a full dedicated video to it. And this is all going to be about Stephen King's 2014 novel, Revival. If you are new to my channel and you're like, why are you reviewing a novel that came out 10 years ago? I will tell you. Because Stephen King is my favorite author. I love Stephen King. I have read so much of his work from back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. Every single decade, I have read a Stephen King book from it. And I know a lot of people love to say that Stephen King was best in the 70s and 80s and up to maybe the 90s. And I tend to agree with that. But I do really believe that in the last 30 years, he has also had a large amount of hits. I really loved The Institute. I really liked If It Bleeds. The Outsider I thought was very captivating. So I do try and keep up with Stephen King's newer releases. And one of the most talked about is Stephen King's Revival. And when I first saw this book, one, the cover is striking. Like, absolutely striking. I love it. And like the lightning coming out of the name Revival is like raised. Like, this book grabbed me. And I was going on vacation back in 2019 to Hawaii, and I'm a really nervous flyer. So I like reading on planes and I like reading on beaches. So I picked up two Stephen King books for the trip. I picked up Gerald's Game and Revival, which at the time I had really heard nothing about either. And this is, I think, before the film came out too. The film for Gerald's Game came out. And one of the things that I really loved about this is, one, right on the cover, it is praised to be very much like vintage King. But two, it is King's interpretation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is not a retelling of Frankenstein, kind of in the way that T. Kingfisher does a lot of her stories, but more so in the way that Salem's Lot is King's retelling of Dracula, which is one of my favorite things that King has ever written. And so I was really excited about this, especially because I'm not actually a fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but I do love the concepts and topics and themes spoken about in that novel. The book didn't grip me. The book kind of bored me to tears. So I was very excited to read this. Apparently, according to King, this is also based off of Arthur Machen's The Great God Pan. I own that book, I'm pretty sure, but I have not read it. But I also just recently learned that when I was picking this up. So I went into this thinking it was entirely about Frankenstein. Anyway, so let's read the back of the book, because I had so much hope for this novel. And if you can see by the title, or if you've been on my channel for a while, I hated it. I hated it. But unlike a lot of novels that I absolutely detest, that I talk about pretty openly on this channel, I think the reason that this book is the one that I speak about the most is because I hated it for different reasons than pretty much any other book that I dislike on my channel. And I'm going to get into it very in depth in this quasi-review. It's more of just me ranting. But I will say I'm going to save all of the spoilers for the end. So I will have a spoiler moment. I can't rant about this book without spoiling something major. And I need to do it. I need to get it off my chest. And I know there's a lot of people who kind of probably want to know why I've always hated on this novel. So there will be a spoiler moment, but it will not be until towards the end. But let's read the back of the book, so in case you were unfamiliar with this, you will know the premise. The new minister came to Harlow, Maine, when Jamie Morton was a boy, doing battle with his toy army men on the front lawn. The young Reverend Charles Jacobs and his beautiful wife brought new life to the local church and captivated their congregation. But with Jamie, he shares a secret obsession, a draw so powerful it would have profound consequences 5 decades after the shattering tragedy that turned the preacher against God, and long after his final scathing sermon. Now, Jamie, a nomadic rock guitarist hooked on heroin, meets Charles Jacobs again. And when their bond becomes a pact beyond even the devil's devising, Jamie discovers that revival has many meanings. Stephen King's darkly electrifying novel of faith, fanaticism, and addiction races to an ending that stuns like lightning. I think this is one of the best books King has ever written. I really do. And I know that that's like shocking because I hate this book so much. I think this is one of the best books Stephen King has ever written, especially in the New Age. The concept of this story and the way that it traverses 5 separate decades of 2 men's lives and how they intertwine and just how vastly different their lives become even though they keep intersecting, I think was phenomenal. I loved seeing King put himself in this story in a way that we have never seen really from him before. A lot of times we see King as the struggling writer, the struggling family man, and the struggling addict. Those are very, very quintessential King things that we see. But what I love about this one, and one of the things that isn't really spoken about too much about Stephen King, is that he is a diehard musician. He's in a band. He performs. And he loves it. And this book, we get to see that side of King. We also do get to see a far more intense side of addiction. He really does focus on heroin more so than some of the other things that he has focused on in his books previously. Usually we see it with like alcoholism, especially in The Shining, and obviously his own personal demons with drugs that you can see very, very much so in Misery. Even though drugs really aren't present in that novel, it really is an entire metaphor for addiction. This one really is a different perspective on something that I feel like King has touched upon many, many times, but we get to see it in a very, very new light. And I love that we don't have a main character who is a writer. We have a main character who is a musician, and we get to see King tap into so much of his passion that we don't really see in his writing because it's something that is completely unrelated to his writing. And I loved that. I loved the character development between Reverend Jacobs and Jamie. I remember I devoured this book. I read this book in like 3 or 4 days, and it was supposed to last me the whole week, and then I was going to read Gerald's Game on the way back. I couldn't put this book down. I was obsessed with this book. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was unique. I thought the character development was amazing. I loved the way that King balanced the concepts of science and religion and your faith in it. And I really, really loved how King created a character who was completely devout and had his whole life going for him, have something awful happen and learn to question God. I thought it was such a sophisticated, well-written, extremely engaging story for King. And it's only like 400 pages. Like, King is very, very good at making novels that are extremely descriptive and over the top, but they can get very, very dense. And you can't necessarily read a King book quickly, but this worked as being a quick read for King. Obviously 400 pages is not a quick read, but when you look at the fact that The Stand and It exist, this is a quick read for King. And I loved this book. I loved that it has these coming of age elements with Jamie. We do see him as a child and watch him grow up. It's almost like taking like one character from Stephen King's It and just writing a novel on them and how their lives continuously intertwine with this one figure, and how they keep kind of getting called back to one another. I really, really liked that. It was definitely a microcosm of kind of the character development and storytelling that he uses in It, and I think that's why I connected with it so much. And I loved that it was his own spin on Frankenstein. We do have this Charles Jacobs character who is this kind of religious figure who also has this love of science and has kind of cracked the code into how science can help revive the dead and help change the lives of people for the better. This kind of intermingling of, again, science and faith, which are two forces that in so many, 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 many aspects of life kind of come head to head and don't ever want to mesh. And King found a way to create a character that is able to really work with those two objects. But at the same time, he's also able to create a character who also then is sort of forced to choose between the two, and then also at the same time find a way to exploit that knowledge that he has and that that charisma that he has in his faith, along with the absolute insane knowledge he has gained from his scientific studies. And I really, really loved the character of Jacobs. I thought he was fascinating. I liked Jamie quite a lot too. I know that there are definitely times in the novel where it kind of slows down a little bit so King can really talk about how much he loves his musicianship, and I do appreciate that. And I know I've seen a lot of criticisms about that aspect of the book, but I didn't mind it at all. I actually felt that it really not only fleshed out Jamie, but again, like I've been saying, it really gave me a new perspective on King. Something that I feel like I've only ever really seen in his biography on writing. Or his memoir, I guess is technically what it was. So I loved the book. I loved it. I didn't want to put it down. I was so captivated, and the storylines were so sad, and the characters were so well crafted, and I loved this kind of timeless swirling of the two characters' lives as they went through crazy dramatic changes, but always kind of found their way back to one another and continued to uplift one another. Well, mainly Jacob's uplifting Jamie. And I was so set on it. And then we get to this scene. I'm trying to remember the character's name. I believe his name is Yates. We get to this scene where Yates sees something. And the spoilers aren't coming yet. There's a scene where Yates and Jamie are chatting. And Yates is kind of talking about his experiences with Jacobs. And as the storyline is going on, we see Yates see something. And it was really, really weird and really, really odd, and I kind of just wrote it off as like this weird, frightening moment that King put in his novel. You know, that's something that I've seen King do a lot. You know, like I think of like the hedge maze animals in The Shining, and like the fire hose in The Shining, and I think of the Patrick Hockstetter chapters in It. You know, these kind of like very, very like weird, scary scenes that at the end of the story don't actually contribute to what's happening, but it's just something there to fill the story up with fear. And so I kind of brushed it off as that because I thought it was really, really weird. But that to me is where, and this is about 3/4 of the way through the novel, I would say. Maybe a little more than 2/3, but definitely around 3/4. This is where the novel started to go downhill for me. And I stayed invested, but after this scene happened, several other characters are kind of thrown in to kind of push the plot forward. And they felt a little bit forced, but I still kept reading because I still really wanted to know what was happening. And then I got to the end. And I have never wanted to throw a book in the ocean as much as I wanted to throw this book in the ocean. The ending of this book is the biggest tonal change I've ever seen in a novel. It infuriated me. It made me completely question how great the beginning of the novel was. It made me finally experience that like King cliche where we talk about that King never knows how to write an ending. And you know, I'd always thought that I had experienced that before. Pet Sematary is one of those King books where I feel like the climax just kind of hits and then it's just like over. The Stand is another one. Like these very iconic books from Stephen King where like the ending just kind of falls short from your expectations. The ending of this book doesn't fall short. The Outsider is another great example of that. The ending of this book doesn't fall short. The ending of this book changes the entire tone of the entire story. And people love it. And I do not understand why. It adds this completely different element of horror that isn't present or hinted to at all throughout the entirety of the novel, except for that one scene with Yates. And I'm supposed to just sit here and buy this whole tonal flip. And nothing has ever angered me more than really just taking an amazing, well-crafted, beautiful story and just being like, haha, never mind, we're doing something completely different. It was like a blindsided magic trick. And again, people love it. And I am not the audience for this book. And I feel like had I known what this was going into it, I never would have touched this book with a 10-foot pole, because the ending of this is bullshit. It is bullshit. And because I am now at the point where I'm going to just dive into how much I cannot stand the end of this book, I'm going to say that spoilers will begin now. Okay? Spoilers are starting, so please, if you don't want to know the end of this book, put this away. This book is beautiful. This book is beautiful. This book is the story of faith in God and the questioning of science and this kind of intertwining of faith between, this intertwining of fate between two people who are kind of destined to always find one another, right? And instead of creating something that really talks about how any of their lives would have that kind of meaning that this entire book has beautifully crafted, Stephen King goes, you know what, we're going to do the cosmic horror thing. We're going to say none of that matters at all. Your faith is like, didn't matter. This destiny crap didn't matter. Even that, to an extent, I understand. But he goes, you know what I'm going to tell everybody? That the world is secretly ruled by giant ants. Giant ants in another dimension that we all go to and become slaves for when we die. And I'm going to talk about that for just a few pages, and then I'm going to close the book. And all you get with it is existential dread and the, oh no, like, the Reverend's wife and kid, slaves for giant ants. Oh no, there's this crazy mother lord ant named Mother who is like overseeing everything and is like just like the face of cruelty, and that's what everybody has to live for. So by tapping into science and helping all of these people really was just rushing them to a crazy early grave instead of a less miserable life than they would have lived with the diseases if I hadn't cured them. We're just gonna go with ants. Ants! This is the man who created Pennywise. This is the man who did the Dark Tower. This is the man who created some of the most iconic faces in horror ever. And his moment to do a cosmic entity is giant effing ants. And I'm not sure what I'm angrier about. I'm not sure if I'm angriest about the fact that the ants felt so lazy. And also, it would have been one thing to be like, it's a hive mind, or like really pull out like the kind of metaphor of the ant. I mean, like, I guess the queen is the mother or whatnot. And I'm pretty sure the queen has something to do with something else in like the King universe, with like the giant turtle and all of that stuff. I don't know, the deadlights. I'm sure it's all connected. I haven't read enough of King's more out there work to understand. But it was so like, okay. And then to like get to this point, King has to really force the story in that direction. We have Jamie reuniting with Astrid, who, as far as I could tell by that point in the book, he doesn't care about. And it's like we're guilt tripping off of a minor character who has very, very little stake in the game just so we can tell this like crazy, weird storyline about ants. And I loved the idea that the whole novel was building up to the fact that like Jacobs was finally able to be the Dr. Frankenstein, and I really wanted the horror at the end of this novel to be that the Frankenstein's monster, you know, goes against his creator, or that the creator loses what he thought he was doing, and there's this concept of him playing God, right? This man who's been sitting there questioning his faith and the meaning of the world, and he's tapped into this amazing power. And it could have gone in so many amazing directions of this concept of playing God, and instead it just bypasses all of it for frickin' space dimensional ants. And I've never felt so cheated out of a book before, because I loved this up until then. And then we like, I just remember like reading it as fast as I could, like just so engrossed in this story and really wanting to understand what was happening, and just having a hard stop when I got to the ants thing. And it was just so precarious the way that like Jacobs kind of forced Jamie back, and it just started to all fall apart too. We see Jacobs in the beginning performing all of these miracles, but the ones that he did that would directly affect Jamie really don't come to light until the end of the story, whereas a lot of the other ones kind of really snowball into catastrophe much, much quicker. And I don't know if it had anything to do with like maybe like the extremities of everything. And if I remember vaguely, I think King tried to like half-ass explain away why like Jamie's brother was totally cool up until like the very, very end. But it just came out of nowhere. And the fact that the whole storyline is really like life is pointless and faith doesn't matter because at the end we're not going to heaven, we're going to go become slaves for these ant creatures. I'm like, why do we need that? Jacob's already lost his whole family. He already lost his whole faith. He's out there conning people into his miracle cures that are actually, you know, we don't know until the very end of the book, poisoning them into depravity and then an early death with ant creatures. You know, he's already been crushed and broken. So this whole story arc of creating Dr. Frankenstein to lead to what would or should have been Frankenstein's monster never gives us the monster. It just gives us a portal dimension to frickin' ants, which ants are not scary. I don't care how big they are. They are not scary. King could have come up with something so Lovecraftian and so over the top. Like when you think of Cthulhu, the way that Lovecraft describes Cthulhu, there is so much love and care and not only description but also vagueness that makes them scary. In this novel, they're just ants. They're ants. And yes, you get the horror of like Jamie's existential dread and like knowing that everybody is going to die and that everybody is going to end up in the ant world and it's going to be misery forever. But it's just like, I don't care at that point. I was invested in Jacobs. I was invested in Jacobs through the eyes of Jamie, and the book begins to focus towards the end entirely on Jamie because we get Jacobs goes away. Jacobs goes to the ant people. And this is why I don't like cosmic horror. I hate when things come out of nowhere to just put existential dread on our main characters and be like, oh God, the world is awful and there's no hope. Like, it's just so hopeless and depraved. And for a story that had so much potential to really tap into the inner workings of humanity and the human mind and the human concept of faith and the human dialogue that we constantly have between faith and between science. There was so much potential in this book. None of it paid off. And that is why I hate this book. Because it was one of those books that I really loved. This was on par to be a 5-star top tier read for me. And it fell off so fast. And it wasn't just a clunky ending, but it was an ending that changed everything that I had hoped for in this novel. And people love it. And people who love cosmic horror and people who love Lovecraftian horror, I get it. I think. I get it because you seem to like that in other things. This is not, to me, horror. This is just sci-fi tapping into something that could be scary. Oh my God, my rant cut out. No, it is just something that is sci-fi. That is something that is kind of angled to be scary to humanity. And I think I just hold my deepest anger in the fact that this is a master of horror, and instead of coming up with something creative in the end, where we focused on Jacob's creation of playing God, his ability to create that monster, put it out there, become what he had always been faithful to, and tap into the power that would eventually destroy everything around him, and kind of see how by playing God, nothing works out for you. We just get this lazy pigeon-holed writing of ants. So yeah, this will always be the biggest disappointment for me, just because I wanted to love it. I felt so into it. I read it so quickly, and I got to the end, and it just completely changed. its entire tone, completely changed its entire angle, completely, in my mind, changed its entire meaning of what it was working up to, of the payoff that I was being led to believe was going to be there. For ants! For ants! Oh my god, I'm gonna say this like 7,000 times in this video. Ants! Thank God Gerald's Game was great. I read this, I was so upset. I remember, like, literally I wouldn't shut up to my dad about it. We were, like, in our Airbnb in Hawaii, and all I could talk about was how much I couldn't believe that this book ended with ants. And then I read Gerald's Game, and Gerald's Game ended up becoming one of my favorite King books of all time. And if you haven't read Gerald's Game is also, in my opinion, one of the scariest books ever written. I think the Space Cowboy is one of the scariest creatures that King has ever written. And it is his ability to write vague, yet also extremely descriptive imagery that makes the Space Cowboy so captivating and so horrifying in a way that these ants will never be. Anyways, sorry to get very, very heated, but I feel like it is finally time that I talked about why I can't stand this book. Oh Lord. Oh Lord. Okay. And there's like the weird love interest thing that isn't actually a love interest, doesn't really go anywhere. There's just so much of a mess to move the plot of this story forward towards the end that just comes out of nowhere. And I loved the whole beautiful slow build up and everything that this book was alluding to as it went forward. But we get none of that in the end. We get space ants. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe buttons down below. Let me know if there are any other books that you would like me to expand upon if there are any other books you would like me to expand upon here in like kind of this review format. I've definitely read a lot of books before I started this channel that I don't really talk about as much because I had read them previously. I've read a lot of King. So definitely let me know. And as always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah. Bye.